Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the reading of a fic entitled Protect Your Heart. Here's the summary. The explosion of Black Whip into the world was a surprise to all. When it makes Midoriya more wary of his own power, Hitoshi finds he can't just sit by and watch Midoriya isolate himself. Now, if only he could be less of a disaster when it comes to Midoriya. This is a Shindeku fic with 4 chapters and just shy of 19,000 words. Chapter 1. A Great Hero. Shinso, I just wanted to say thank you for helping me out. I really think you'll be a great hero one day. Hitoshi's breath hitches, but by the time he's recovered enough to say thanks, Midoriya has already walked off. His gratitude is met with empty space. It doesn't take a genius to notice how Midoriya changed after the exercise between Class 1A and 1B. Hitoshi's not even in their class, but he's heard the students in 1A talking about it at lunch, and seen Midoriya slink off to who knows where for lunch. It's been 2 days, and Midoriya has remained distant from them all the whole time. The only person he seems to get close to is Bakugo, and even then, they don't exactly have a friendly relationship, despite the smaller boy's efforts. Because of that, Midoriya has all but isolated himself. Despite how Hitoshi had introduced himself at the beginning of the year, he admired Midoriya for his strength and perseverance, but he also recognized something familiar in him. Something in the way Midoriya walked around in the hallways and carried himself, ever shy and wary, in conversation. Part of him wanted to say that perhaps Midoriya was afraid of his own quirk, like Hitoshi used to be, but whatever happened during the exercise seemed to be something that Midoriya hadn't expected, while his general behavior has been around since the beginning. That meant there had to be something deeper to his background. Hitoshi wasn't really one to pry into other people's problems, but he was curious. What had Midoriya gone through, that Hitoshi felt such a connection with him? Either way, seeing the young hero in training, moping around and avoiding his friends all the time was starting to annoy Hitoshi, so, when the lunch bell rang, Hitoshi left the room in a rush with his bento in hand and headed to 1A's classroom. He arrives just in time to see Midoriya leaving the classroom with his own bento. It's no surprise that he was alone. Midoriya, Hitoshi calls out to him. The teen tenses up and looks at him, but once he sees it's Hitoshi, he relaxes and smiles and waves at him. Let me eat lunch with you. Hitoshi has no problem asking the other teen. He doesn't exactly spend his lunches doing anything worthwhile. Midoriya blushes of all things, but agrees. Of course, Shinso. Let's go outside, he says with a smile. Hitoshi is actually a bit surprised that Midoriya agreed so easily. He thought it might be a bit hard, but the only struggle he has is having to walk a bit faster than he usually does. Even though he's taller than Midoriya, the smaller teen is rushing away from his classroom. Why are you in such a hurry? Hitoshi asks him as they're walking down the back stairway. Midoriya is clinging to the handrail and doesn't look at Hitoshi at all when he says, I don't want to eat with my friends right now. Then we're not friends? Hitoshi shoots back and Midoriya goes bright red. He turns toward him, a little bit too fast, a protest on the tip of his tongue, and slips down onto the next step. Before he can fall to the bottom, Hitoshi grabs a hold of his hand. Careful, Midoriya, he says, pulling him back up to a standing position. Midoriya's blush isn't going down at all. He's pouting and looking straight at Hitoshi. You know that's not what I meant. I consider you a friend, even if you... He stops, and Hitoshi guiltily wonders if he'd been too distant for Midoriya to realize he thinks the same of him. It had been clearest during the exercise, when he'd called out to Midoriya with his quirk, but he'd known it even before that. It's just, if I get too emotional, and I always get too emotional, I don't want my quirk to get loose and hurt them again. I wouldn't be able to live with that. So Hitoshi had been right. Midoriya is slightly scared of his own quirk, but don't you think you should have a little more faith in your friends? They're strong, too. And they're probably stronger than Hitoshi, as much as he hates to admit that. This quirk is... I don't understand it, and I can barely control it, but Shinso, you could, with your quirk. Midoriya looks up at him with wide, glittering eyes. And I trust you, so I know if it got out of hand, you would help me, right? Fuck, Hitoshi is too gay for this. Since when did Midoriya get so close? Why was he still holding his hand? Were Hitoshi's palms sweaty? Shouldn't they keep walking down the stairs? Yes, he answers, regardless of his current feelings. Then Midoriya smiles, and Hitoshi knows he's ruined. Who gave him the ability to do that? Some cruel god? Thank you. You're my hero. Midoriya cheers before dragging him down the rest of the stairs and out the back door. Hitoshi's mind centers in on those words, and he can't shake them from his mind. He doesn't think anyone has ever made him this happy just with words. He is Midoriya's hero. Hitoshi doesn't think it can get any better than that. They're behind the school, and there's lots of grass. Hitoshi isn't really sure where they're going to sit until Midoriya leans against the school building and slides down to sit on the grass. Hitoshi has no hesitation joining him, but, "Is this where you've been sitting? Isn't it kind of lonely?" In all the times Hitoshi saw them, before 1A versus 1B, Midoriya had always been with his friends, so Hitoshi had taken him as something of a social creature who didn't like to be alone. Add on how he was always smiling and glowing around them, and Hitoshi's thoughts had been cemented. Midoriya just shrugs as he unwraps his bento. "I'm used to eating alone," is all he says, and Hitoshi knows better than to prod for more information. Me too," is all he offers in response. Midoriya frowns at that. "Then we'll both sit together from now on. You're too cool to sit alone," Midoriya tells him earnestly, and Hitoshi feels a light blush come onto his face. He doesn't think anyone has ever called him cool before. "Sure," he says skeptically, but Midoriya just smiles into his lunch like Hitoshi believes his words as much as he seemed to. And, as if he's trying to condemn Hitoshi into his feelings, he adds on, "And I know you'll be a great hero with your quirk. I can hardly wait for you to join our class. Are you still training with Aizawa-sensei?" Hitoshi takes a big bite of rice and nods. "Even though I've got the capture weapon mostly down, I still have to get stronger," he tells Midoriya. "Good luck. I believe in you, and if you need help, I'm happy to join in on your training," Midoriya tells him cheerfully. "You're too nice," Hitoshi grumbles under his breath, but Midoriya doesn't seem to hear it. "You know," he starts off a bit louder, so he gets Midoriya's attention. "I used to be scared of my quirk, too." Midoriya sputters. "I'm not scared of it, just mildly concerned." He tries to stress to Hitoshi, who just rolls his eyes. "Uh-huh. Anyway," he continues, "your quirk is a part of you, no matter how weird it is. I doubt you'll hurt your friends just by eating lunch with them." He tries to stress to Midoriya. Hitoshi remembers when he first got his quirk, and everyone at school was terrified of him. At first, he tried to play it off, but then it started to transfer to his home life, and he got too scared to even talk to his own parents lest he accidentally control them. He was lucky they were so patient with him. But Midoriya doesn't look very happy with what Hitoshi is saying. "I do miss them. A lot," he admits, his voice cracking. "But what if I eat with you guys? In the cafeteria?" He offers quickly, still living off the high of Midoriya calling him his hero. Midoriya looks a bit pensive as he reaches up to pull a bit his bottom lip. Hitoshi's entranced, to say the least. "I mean, if you really don't mind," he says, looking up at Hitoshi with watery eyes. Was Midoriya doing this on purpose? How did he know exactly how to make Hitoshi do what he wanted? Was it some innate ability Hitoshi didn't understand but couldn't resist? "I really don't," he tells him, and Midoriya sets down his lunch in an instant to hug Hitoshi. He doesn't say anything, but the force with which he's hugging Hitoshi is enough to get his message across. Hitoshi is so shocked, he doesn't even reach up to hug him back until it's too late because Midoriya is pulling away. "Sorry, I did tell you I get emotional easily," he says sheepishly, and Hitoshi just slowly nods his head. Midoriya certainly was emotional, but Hitoshi couldn't say he minds it at all. He wore his heart on his sleeve, that was for sure, but it was nice to know how genuine he really was. You don't get that very often. Or at least, he doesn't. Even though it's a Friday night, Hitoshi is stressing over English homework when there's a knock on his door. He's immediately suspicious. His classmates had been relatively friendly with him after the sports festival, but none of them had ever approached him in his room before. He cautiously stands up from his desk and just stands watching the door for a second. In his mind, he's replaying every single time his past classmates tried to bait him with even the idea of friendship. Every time that happened, he ended up in a worse shape than before. Sure, this is UA, but could he really assume it wouldn't happen here? Perhaps he was simply due for it, after such a peaceful semester. The person on the other side seems incredibly unsympathetic of his current thought process because they knock again. Don't they know he's kind of freaking out in here? Whatever. If they were that desperate, Hitoshi might as well check out what's up. He gives in and walks over to the door. Before opening it completely, he inches it ajar ever so slightly and peeks his eye through the crack. A cheerful face stares back at him and he frowns. What was she doing here? Now, feeling slightly confident that he can open the door safely, he pulls it a bit faster to get a full look at Uraraka from Class 1A. She was Midoriya's friend and had been there right with him after the teen's quirk went out of control. Uraraka hadn't been able to do much in the way of suppressing the quirk, but it had been obvious just how much she cared for Midoriya. It still didn't explain why she's standing outside his dorm with such an expectant look on her face. Hi, Shinzo-kun. I hope you're having a nice night, she asks with such cheer that it nearly has him backing up from the force of it. Uraraka, what's up? He asks, holding himself steady with a tight grip on his door. Her smile begins to waver, but she pushes through an invitation. Come join us for movie night. We're watching The Matrix, and it wouldn't be the same without you. It seems too forced. While he can't prove that Uraraka is really asking to trick him or put him on the spot, he begins to get defensive immediately. Because I have a brainwashing quirk? He asks in an accusatory tone, intoning that it's not really a question at all. Uraraka's jaw drops, and he expects her to turn to leave in embarrassment or turn her smile into a scowl for not falling into her trap. She may be Midoriya's friend, but that doesn't mean she's a good person. But she does none of these things. Oh my gosh, I didn't even consider that. Then she steps back and falls into a deep bow. Please forgive me. Hitoshi has never felt this awkward in his life. Stand up, please. He insists. He doesn't think anyone's ever bowed to him before, and he hopes that, if all goes well, he can avoid it ever happening again. If that's not what you were insinuating, why would you invite me? He asks. Well, I guess I have to admit I didn't have the purest intentions, she begins, and there it is, exactly what he expected. It's just, Deku has barely hung out with us at all since that training exercise, and we can't just let him sit in his room and mope, you know? But whenever we invite him, he just gets this angsty look on his face and then turns us down, even though it's clear that he misses us, but Hitoshi holds up both his hands, hoping that it's enough to stop her from talking. Did Midoriya's rambling somehow rub off on her, because that was a lot of words? Sorry, this is because of Midoriya? Yeah, she says in a high voice, clearly unsure if it's a right or wrong answer. If that's all right, it's just, you were the one who got him to eat with us again, and she sighs, looking a bit defeated. You make him feel comfortable with his quirk. I don't want to make it seem like we're using you for your quirk, because we'd all really love to have you, but she trails off, clearly hoping he understands without her explaining the rest. As much as Hitoshi likes hanging out with Midoriya and enjoys talking to him, there's at least one problem that rises up with him going over to the 1A dorm for the class's movie night. I'm not totally sure that some of your classmates would want me there, he says, thinking back on the sports festival where he did everything he could to get as far as possible. Can he really trust when she says that they'd all love to have him over? He thinks of Ojiro in particular. The blonde either sends him cold looks in the hallway or pretends he doesn't exist. Hitoshi had purposefully avoided him during the 1A, 1B training. Because of that, it had gone fine, but he isn't sure what would happen in close quarters with any of the people he'd used his quirk on. Ida, our class president, actually talked to everyone before I came over, and they were all fine with it, I promise, she assures him. Huh. Your class is pretty thorough, he muses. Uraraka laughs. That's all Ida. Let it not be said that there's any box he leaves unchecked, she says with a laugh. She clasps her two hands together in front of her legs and looks up at him. So, can you come? She pleads with big eyes that seem to peer into his soul. He loosens his grasp on the door and finds himself giving in. I guess I have no choice, huh? Uraraka lets out a sharp laugh and gives him a good-natured smile before shaking her head and pulling him out of his room. As he's dragged out of the dorm, he finds himself ducking his head around his classmates before they leave the building. Outside, the cold air makes him incredibly aware of his failure to bring a sweater of any sort. He says nothing on it and follows Uraraka across campus, shivering all the way there. The brunette opens the door to Heights Alliance with a flourish and steps in with a successful look on her face. I got Shinzo to come, she announces, and suddenly he has 18 pairs of eyes on him. Also, can we switch to the movie while I go get Deku? She asks sheepishly. Hitoshi's honestly surprised by that. In middle school, most everyone was resolved to simply not talk to him, but the especially bold ones would bully him physically and emotionally. They knew more brainwashing examples than him, and he was the one with the quirk. Sometimes he gets a kick out of thinking how much time they must have wasted, just trying to get under his nerves. There are a few nods of assent before Uraraka starts going up the stairs. Not wanting to be left by himself, Hitoshi follows after her and hopes no one calls him back. She walks down the hallway on the second floor and stops in front of a door that would look like all the rest if not for the All Might door hanger. Uraraka knocks on the door with her palm facing out and leans in. Deku, we're about to start the movie. Do you want to come? She asks with a high voice. In a strained voice, Midoriya replies, I'm kind of busy right now, so I can't go. The brunette sends a wink toward Hitoshi before sticking to the door a second time, saying, But Deku, even Shinzo is coming. Instantly after, there's a loud crash coming from inside the room. Hitoshi can't even imagine what Midoriya was doing to cause such a ruckus. Did he drop some sort of 100-pound weight or something? There's a bit more shuffling after that, before Midoriya's door opens just the slightest and he peeks out. Hitoshi is tall enough to look over the teen's head and see that his whole wooden chair had been knocked over, as well as an assortment of notebooks and papers on the ground. "Shinso, you're really here," he mutters before going slightly red and slamming the door closed. Hitoshi and Uraraka exchange a look, wondering what could have caused that reaction, and Uraraka risks pressing to the door one last time. "So, are you coming or not?" she asks. The taller teen can't help but join her, and sidles next to her to ask, "Yeah, are you going to make me attend movie night with your classmates by myself?" There's another crash in response, and the two teens standing outside can't help but laugh a bit. When Midoriya finally exits his room, his flush has gone down a bit, and he's in a green knit sweater. There's a worn All Might blanket cradled in his arms like a baby, and Hitoshi smirks at the sight. "Sorry for, the noise," he mutters out, what seems to be obligation. Uraraka leads the way downstairs, and the boys follow her, dutifully. As they walk, Hitoshi can't help but ask, "What were you even doing that made you knock over your chair?" Bashfully, Midoriya admits that he'd been trying to connect with Black Whip again, and Hitoshi quirks an eyebrow. "Are you sure you should be doing that on your own? I thought you were trying to be careful with it." "I think it's just that I want to bring it out without so much emotional collapse as the catalyst. When it came out, I was angry more than anything, and it skyrocketed from there. I lost control, and, well, you know what happened. The worst part was that losing control, it felt kind of good. I'm so used to keeping everything under wraps that it doesn't happen often. The last time I was able to really let loose was during the fight with Overhaul because of Eri." Midoriya half says, half mutters, low under his breath, so that only Hitoshi can hear it, but barely at that. Hitoshi actually feels like he can relate. Growing up, there had been a lot of focus on what he could or couldn't say before he had full control of his quirk. It had been the most controlled part of his life because sometimes he'd make people do things without wanting them to. He wouldn't even notice when his quirk was active or not. It mostly happened with his parents because they were the only ones who really talked to him. "I think I understand. I hope that goes well. Have you been successful at all?" Midoriya shakes his head. "Not in the slightest. I think I have to have a strong intent to bring it out, but no matter how hard I focus, I barely get a flicker. I was balancing on my chair when you guys came, and I was so shocked that I fell backwards and brought everything with me trying to stabilize," he explains, looking a bit embarrassed. Hitoshi snickers, and Midoriya shoves an elbow right into his ribs. He shoves his friend back in return, but it doesn't even faze Midoriya. Despite their height difference, Midoriya is fucking built and can't be moved easily. When they get to the common room, the class isn't paying them much attention this time. Rather, they're in a big argument of what movie to watch. It seems they've broken up into two sides, each holding their own choice proudly in the air. In the chaos, Midoriya shuffles them over to the couch. He sits down next to an armrest, pulls Hitoshi down to sit right next to him, as close as can be. Hitoshi wonders if he's being used as some sort of shield. He can't bring himself to mind in the slightest. "Now we won't have to sit on the ground. The common room was not built for comfortable floor time," Midoriya tells him very matter-of-factly, and Hitoshi nods in response. Once the class notices that Midoriya had already settled, they fall into their own spots. Todoroki ends up sitting next to Hitoshi after giving him a very long, undiscernible stare that Hitoshi is too scared to question. The movie starts, and he ends up draped in the same blanket as Midoriya. They've become akin to a human furnace, but Hitoshi doesn't hate it. Not even when it distracts him from the entire movie, because Midoriya's leg is pressed against his, and sometimes his friend's hand will brush against his whenever the movie gets too exciting. He hopes Midoriya doesn't ask him what he thinks of the movie, because at this point he doesn't even know any of the characters' names. Hitoshi knew he was gay, but his feelings for Midoriya are getting a tad overwhelming. Well, it actually kind of makes sense. They've been eating all their lunches together, and Midoriya never showed any sign of judging him for his quirk. What more could Hitoshi want? Now he was hyper-aware of Midoriya's touches, despite how unlikely it was that they would get together. The movie ends with a few sniffles and tears from 1A and Midoriya's head on Hitoshi's shoulder. For the past few minutes he's done his best to be as still as possible, so as not to jolt Midoriya's head, and it's actually kind of tiring. When Midoriya brings his head up, again to look at Hitoshi, the taller finds himself dropping his shoulders into a more relaxed position. Midoriya's eyes are shiny from emotion, and Hitoshi can't pull his stare away. He offers a hesitant smile, and Midoriya gives him one back before using the back of his hand and knit sweater to wipe away the tears. "Can I walk you back to your dorm?" he asks, and there's nothing Hitoshi could have done to turn him down, so he nods. Midoriya stands and takes the blanket with him, wrapping it around his shoulders, before offering Hitoshi a hand to grab hold of. Hitoshi accepts, of course, and Midoriya pulls him to his feet. The walk back to his dorms is filled with Midoriya's thoughts on the movie, and Hitoshi dutifully listens. He may not know what any of it means, but Midoriya can be pretty insightful, and there's no way he'd not listen. When they get to the door of the common room, Midoriya looks a little bit pensive, like he doesn't want to leave. Hitoshi finds himself asking, "Do you want to come see my room?" "Yes!" Midoriya practically shouts in his face, and Hitoshi lets them both in. There are a few people from his class sitting around and talking, but when they walk in, the conversation ceases, and they all start looking at Midoriya. Hitoshi thinks it's funny that they're having the same reaction that 1A had to him. He herds Midoriya up the stairs and toward the third floor, where his room is on the first door on the right. Opening the door, he lets Midoriya go in first, with the offer of, "Feel free to sit down wherever you want." His room is pretty basic, with the standard bed, desk, and closet combo, but he brought his own beanbag and TV to make it more like his room at home. He has different movie posters hanging on the wall. A pro of having no friends growing up is that you get a lot of free time. He spent his engaging with mystery-based books and movies, though he ended up being disappointed by predictable mind-quirk villains and poor portrayals of heroes more often than not. He kept with the genre for those rare peeks at original storytelling and pre-quirk mysteries, which were usually the most creative. Midoriya takes it all in for a few seconds before sitting right on Hitoshi's bed. "I like your room. It's comfortable," he says. Then he's silent, but it's clear he has something more to say. Hitoshi isn't sure what he could be thinking about so hard. Hitoshi has to compose himself before he sits right next to his friend. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Hitoshi figures he should start. Giving Hitoshi a relieved look, Midoriya asks, "I was wondering if you can brainwash people to do things they've never done before. Like, not necessarily something they're not capable of, just, well, I think you get it." Hitoshi ruminates on the question. "I'd assume so, given we both know what the action is. But I'm not sure it would exactly go well. If I tried to make someone do a backflip for the first time, they might mess up because they don't know the exact muscle movements, and, to be honest, neither do I." Midoriya is silent as he tugs on his bottom lip. He looks like he's thinking of something very serious. "Hey, Shinso, would you mind helping me tomorrow? I'm training with All Might and Kachan and was hoping you could help." He asks with no preamble. Is the question because of what Hitoshi just revealed about his quirk? "Then maybe after we can study or just hang out together?" He follows up with pleading eyes. "Are you sure that they wouldn't mind me coming?" He asks to clarify, and Midoriya aggressively nods his head. "Then yeah, I can come. Text me the details." "Yeah, thanks so much, Shinso. It means a lot." Midoriya smiles at him, and Hitoshi's heart speeds up to go at least twice as fast. Then he gets up from Hitoshi's bed and walks to the door. "Good night. Sleep well," he says before heading out. Hitoshi doesn't even get to return the sentiment because he feels speechless. Just what is he getting himself into? All right, listeners. This is Chapter 1 of Protect Your Heart. Chapter 2 will be next. I hope you all are enjoying this so far. Let me know your thoughts and reactions, and as always, thank you so much for listening.